OAI, a paragon of controversy, chaos, and copyright infringement. My favorite. I have many rants that I could make about AI. I have many curiosities I could investigate about AI. But today, specifically, we're going to be talking about AI and its impact on education, literacy, and our horrendously shrinking attention spans from the perspective of a newly graduated high school senior. Why? Because I'm bitter about it, and I finally have evidence to validate it from MIT. And it brings me great joy. So we're going to talk about it. Disclaimer, before we get a bit too deep into this, I have, if you could not already tell, issues with AI. I do not like AI in creative spaces. I do not like generative AI for writing or art creation. However, I am not saying that all AI should not exist. That is unrealistic at this current point in time. I'm not saying all AI is bad. I am specifying very specifically generative AI for the purpose of writing and art-based production. I have a lot of friends who are either in scientific fields or want to be in scientific fields or statistical fields or mathematic fields. I know a lot of adults through my parents who work in scientific or STEM fields who use AI. AI is very important for their work. It is important for science. I respect that. I accept that. That does not mean that generative AI should be overtaking the creative market. I'm always in an anti-AI mood. It's like my default setting, but particularly at the moment because of character AI and these sort of related problems, I have been reminded of an issue that I saw quite a lot about a few months ago, back in, I think, November, December, when an Atlantic article came out talking about the elite college students who can't read, which is genuinely horrifying. I can read quite quickly. I read quite frequently. I am a writer. I am a reader. I enjoy books. Not everyone is like me. I did not enjoy 1984 by George Orwell. I had to read it 3 times, and each time it took me longer because I hated the process more and more. However, that does not mean that my reading the book did not contain literary merit. It did not help my education. It did. It was important. I now understand a great deal of references and can now make them myself, among other things. I had to write essays about that book multiple times. I will never willingly analyze it on this channel. Ever. I'm free now. I hope. But my own biases and opinions aside, it is quite shocking that major publications and major studies are finally starting to catch on to what is sort of a general feeling that you can get being on the internet. There is a problem with Gen Z and reading. There's a problem with Gen Alpha too, but I don't have as much of a case study to go about for Gen Alpha, so we're not touching them. This is not going to be me reading statistics. This is going to be me talking about why I think AI is a problem for students specifically. Because here's the thing. I am, in my own essence, a romantic. I have romanticized views about a lot of things. And one of those things is academic integrity. That's going to be crushed in a few months when I go to college. My romantic view about academic integrity comes from my own educational background and my own love of learning. I enjoy learning. Therefore, I have this idea in my brain that most people generally do enjoy learning. And that's because a lot of my friends do enjoy learning. However, I am not so high and mighty that I am to believe that the stereotypes I saw in Disney Channel shows and CW shows are not true and that the majority of people don't enjoy learning. And of the people I know, those who had to suffer through a public school history class hate history. I myself, who never had to deal with that, love history. That is, among other things, part of my own bias. I am very pro-learning. I like learning. I come from a family that loves learning. However, in the modern day, with our attention spans, even my own shrinking, and the problems with AI being everywhere, the old adage of if there's a will, there's a way has sort of shifted into if there's a will to cheat, there's a way to cheat. And that way is usually chatgpt. My validation for my dislike of AI cheating and specifically AI writing came in the form of a recent MIT study that looked into what happens when students use AI to write their papers, how this impacts the brain, and to explain a long, complicated study short in the bits that I understood of it because I am not an expert, and after reading experts' own analysis of it, this study concluded that over the course of multiple months, the students who used no generative AI to write their papers had more retention of skills and more memory of what they had written, while the students who had used chatgpt had a drastically different result. They could not remember most of what they had written even a few minutes after writing it, and they had lower levels of brain activity in critical parts of the brain related to learning and memory. Now, this study also had a middle group who were those that used Google AI, so not specifically generative AI, but AI assistants, and that showed more favorable results. Basically, to sum up these three test groups, as can be assumed, if you do all of your work and research yourself, you will remember the most. If you do some of it yourself and use some AI assistants to increase productivity and speed up search results, you will still have a relatively favorable memory. And if you use ChatGPT to generative AI all of your papers, you will have lower retention rates and poorer memory of what you wrote because you didn't actually write it. However, the most interesting thing about this study was at the end, they did a test. They had all of the students write an essay slash paper. I'm still a bit fuzzy on exactly what qualifies an essay versus a paper, but they had them write a long period of writing, and the students who had used ChatGPT performed much poorer at this task because they were not allowed to use ChatGPT. This essay had to be written completely their own. I believe it was some sort of opinion or argument essay that did not require research. And even then, an opinion and argument essay that did not require research written all on its own without AI caused problems. So, long story short, as anyone with any sort of knowledge about AI could guess, generative AI doesn't actually help you learn the same way writing papers does. And this isn't surprising. We could conclude this from our own anecdotal evidence, and we'll get to anecdotal evidence later. However, I want to circle back to that Atlantic article that about every commentary YouTuber under the sun was talking about 3-4 months ago. From the right to the left, everyone was screaming about it. Why? Because the fact that elite Ivy League institutions, some of which are older than many, many countries, were saying that their students cannot even read more than 1 or 2 books a semester was shocking and horrifying. Because most people, be they millennials, Gen X, or baby boomers, all had to read in college. That is the main thing you hear when you go to college. And my own parents often said that. My cousin who went to college a few years ago had to do a lot of reading. That's your main thing. But the problem in this case that the article was talking about wasn't that they couldn't read, it was that they couldn't read books, novels, lengthy works of literary merit, things that are maybe not even that long. Things that are, while hard to read, important for your mind's development and your skills as a literary analyst. Because here's the thing. Schools don't teach reading the way they should. They don't teach reading when it comes to lengthy texts. They teach reading passages. And this, while not AI related, connects to a greater problem. My generation, Generation Z, is having problems on all fronts because not only are we having generative AI that makes things quicker, we are not used to reading lengthy novels. We are used to reading small passages and being able to get the gist. And I'm not saying that every school should make students read 10 novels a year. However, I am saying that this attention span problem, this problem that AI seems to be causing with our retention, connects to this lack of literacy when it comes to these elite Ivy League students. The main crux between Ivy League and non-Ivy League is that Ivy Leagues love test scores and AP credits and extracurriculars. However, it's still a lottery. Every student that applies to an Ivy League school has roughly the same application with some slight variation. However, this does not inherently equate to them being better. But the difference between Ivy League schools and non-Ivy League schools when it comes to how much the students can read isn't that different. Because here's the thing about my anecdotal evidence, and I have a lot of it. I talk to my teachers. I talk to a lot of my teachers. And a lot of my teachers, both former teachers from high school and teachers I will have in college next year have talked to me about lowering their standards, not in terms of how they require their students to act, but in terms of how much reading and writing they require their students to complete. Because of one main reason. Can you guess? It's AI. My history teacher started not assigning papers all the way back in early 2024, more than a year and a half ago now, because she could no longer trust that her students weren't going to be using AI on them, and she didn't want to have to deal with the consequences. Last spring, when I was taking AP Language and Composition, my AP English teacher would respond on our forum posts. And if someone's came back as having used AI in the, ironically enough, AI detection system, she would message you privately and say this came back as AI. This happened to me on a post that was about 400 words that I had written in a mad sprint at about 11:30 p.m. the night it was due. I confirmed that it wasn't AI, and she took my word for it because nothing else ever came up as it, and she agreed that the AI detection system had a problem. However, not all of the students were like that. In fact, I have a painful memory of one student in particular who clearly did it so many times that my English teacher went so far as to publicly call him out for it in the public forum, not privately like she had done with, according to her, at least half the class. And that's a problem because here's the thing. An AP class is about an AP test. And if you're using AI to cheat at an AP class, that means you're not actually learning what you need to learn for an AP test. Using generative AI to write your timed AP essays will not help you on test day because you can't use AI on test day. This, again, comes back to that MIT study. Anecdotally, I don't know how the student who was using AI for his homework did on the AP English test. However, I can assume, based on the results of the MIT study of the students who use ChatGPT for their papers when then having to write them without ChatGPT, he probably didn't do particularly well. I'm not saying that students shouldn't be getting help for their AP classes if they're really hard, but that help should be from a teacher or a fellow student or a TA or a parent. It shouldn't be from AI. AI causes problems in the long term, even though it might be a short term solution. It's the same with a lot of different cheating, but the difference is cheating methods historically have still taught you something. Not always good things, but something. AI has many problems, and trust me when I tell you, there will be multiple rants about its copyright infringement violations later. Character AI particularly has that problem. However, the issue I want to discuss here isn't to do with character AI or copyright infringement. It's to do with the dangerous consequences of students using AI rampantly. We won't learn if we use AI. I learn from doing the work, from reading, from analyzing. I like reading and analyzing. That's why I make this YouTube channel, so that I can analyze media and literature and culture with the skills I have learned from my many extensive English, logic, philosophy, psychology, and history classes. This issue with learning comes back to the attention span problem. Because while I could totally and will probably totally rant at some point about the consensus from that Atlantic article and the teachers it interviewed within it talking about why students can't read and why they can't read long books, another problem in the general sense is attention spans. Attention spans are shrinking. Even my own is much smaller than it once was. The fact that 10-year-old me had a longer attention span than 18-year-old me is a worrying thought. But it's an anecdote that almost everyone can relate to. You yourself or someone you know has probably talked about, ranted about, or thought about, hey, why is my attention span shorter than it once was? You may be wondering, why can't I do as much anymore? And there are a lot of neurological reasons for that I'm not going to get into because that is not my area of expertise. However, my area of expertise is media. Big fan of it. I know a lot about it, all strains. And a key part of media is length requirements. And short form versus long form content has been an argument for years. Not, I'd say, as much in the 2010s, but since COVID, there's been a huge uptick in that argument. In fact, it's such a divide that until recently, you mostly saw a strict divide. You had content creators who made long form content, video essays, analyses, tutorials on YouTube or other platforms. And then you had more recently the short form content on TikTok and Instagram, short form reels or videos or things that grabbed your attention quickly. And while in theory, the basic tip of start with a hook remains the same, the amount of information you can cram into 60 seconds versus 60 minutes is massively different. Short form content optimizes dopamine rushes, hooks to keep you invested, calls to action to get you to follow, like, and comment, and inflammatory statistics or random comments that have no real backing. One of my favorite YouTube channels is Mini Minuteman. He does great videos about archaeology and debunking archaeological conspiracies and discussing underrepresented topics in the archaeological field. However, he has lengthy, multi-hour long videos that I will consistently watch while doing my laundry, cooking dinner, or working out. And he also has short form content. And he himself, in multiple videos, has discussed how the amount he can get done in a short form video is drastically reduced. He can't bring in as much evidence. He can't bring in as many statistics. He cannot discuss as complexly in a short form video. And that's just the fact of it. In fact, most short form videos are designed to get your attention in under a second because our attention spans are suffering so much that many people will click off your video in a second. Our attention spans are shrinking rapidly because our brains are being trained off the social media algorithms to want dopamine, to want hooks, to want information in seconds. And that is unrealistic. This isn't a sci-fi story. You can't simply plug yourself in or touch a magical space ball and suddenly know everything in the universe. And I don't want us to. The often greatest defense of AI is people going, but hey, it'll make everything so much easier, so much quicker. But quicker isn't always better. In some instances, that is correct. Again, circle back to my disclaimer. AI is important in scientific fields. It is important in helping expand medical research and climate research and other research that will hopefully help our world and help the people in it. However, that is not the same thing as making everything mechanical, as taking the ability to learn and turning it into some factory setting of simply typing a question into Google and learning everything. My favorite anecdote, if you watch old media, is that you will often come across a scene where a character goes, "You shouldn't use a calculator. You won't be able to carry a calculator with you later in life." My mother had that said to her. My father had it said to him. But the irony of that statement is that is true. That exists now. Watch movies or shows from the 80s, and some librarian and some will talk about needing to understand how the library works because you'll need it to learn things later in life. That has also been disproven. And I am thankful for that for a certain extent. I would not enjoy writing papers without Google or DuckDuckGo to quickly and easily help me find resources that may or may not exist in hard copy anywhere near me. But I'm still taking the time to learn. I still separate sometimes. And while I would never touch grass because I live in New England and we have a tick problem, I do go outside. I do enjoy the world around me. And I do take for a second to think that maybe my attention span shrinking and everyone else's is a problem. In its essence, AI is not the enemy. AI is an important and dangerous tool, and in the same way that social media is. And the way they work together is harmful to students, Gen Z and Gen Alpha alike, because our brains are still developing. Your brain doesn't finish developing until you're in your mid-20s. And as MIT has shown, even just a few months being heavily dependent on AI can drastically change how your brain functions neurologically. This is important. The fact that our attention spans are shrinking, that people often get their news from short 60-second TikToks, is important. It's a problem because having a long attention span is important. And I'm not saying that everyone has to be able to read War and Peace in a single sitting. However, I am saying that the fact that so many people can't, that we struggle to read even a couple hundred pages of, say, middle grade aged literature, is a problem. Because I have been in classes with people who find reading Pride and Prejudice hard. And it may be hard if you've never read Jane Austen before, but it shouldn't be so monumentally hard that you feel the need to go to ChatGPT and look up an AI summary of the book, because then you learn nothing. And that is a problem. And I could go on a long rant about how AI is shortening our attention spans and how this is impacting media, specifically television shows, because it is a pet peeve of mine. I missed the 22 episode season. Give me back the 22 episode season. But that's a different video, one that I'll probably make in a couple weeks once the Gilded Age season 3 wraps up and I have a new case study to look at when it comes to season lengths. Or once the Stranger Things season 5 episode lengths get released, and then we can have a greater discussion about releasing 8 films and calling it a television show. I won't be complaining, but it will be a discussion all the same. My point here is that our attention spans are important. They are a key part of how we function in society, how students can learn, how adults can teach. If you cannot sit down for more than 10 minutes without considering going on your phone and scrolling because you can't think of anything else to do to occupy your time, that's a problem, objectively. I'm not shaming you for it. I'm not saying that you're a horrible person or you're some stooge of the modern AI economy. I'm saying that you should consider why this is happening. Why can't you sit down and read a book or knit something or write an article or draw a picture? Why is social media and AI your first thought? If I have a question about something, I'll Google it and go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole. I did that a couple weeks ago, and I managed to get from one politician to cults in the South Americas within like 25 minutes in the car. I learned a lot. I still remember a lot of it, and I think it's pretty funny. But, and here's the thing, that was possible because of technology. And I respect technology for that. I'm not saying that we should become hermits and not use any technology. I'm saying that AI is dangerous and that if it is not used properly and if it is used as a crutch, as a go to, as the only answer when you're struggling to write a paper or find the answer to a test question, you are going to be irreparably harmed by it. AI is not the answer if you don't know what something means. AI shouldn't be the answer. AI has been known to make things up. AI has been known to degrade our neurological abilities. And the AI algorithms that feed you AI content made explicitly for profit, made explicitly to keep churning up views and churning up likes, is not good for you. It's just a fact. I'm not saying delete your TikTok, your Instagram, and your, is it called X still? I'm saying evaluate why your attention span is so low and understand that it may not entirely be your fault. We didn't all realize what was happening, even those of us that tried to keep our attention spans long. I can still sit down and read a book, or in my case, I'll pace my kitchen and read a book because multitasking, am I right? But not all of us can. I have friends who can't. I have friends who are adults who can't. And that is also a time thing because adults have less time than teenagers objectively. But my point still stands. My interest in books, in shows, still remains true. I can watch a 2-hour long video essay by my favorite YouTuber without blinking, without feeling like I'm wasting my time, without being tempted to skip through things. The same cannot be said for television shows, but that's an entirely different argument. I can still watch them. I don't take 3 seconds of watching a show and go, well, it's not for me, scroll past and pick another one. But that is how our brains are being trained on social media. And that is how Generation Alpha is being trained as well. And that leads us into our conclusion. Because Generation Alpha is an entirely different beast than Gen Z when it comes to their attention spans and their problems. I'm sure you've seen the many, many videos about iPad kids, about Gen Alpha influencers, and there is a lot to be said. But a lot of those problems can boil down to one thing. Our attention spans are dying slowly and quickly before our eyes, and we're doing nothing about it. We are eagerly taking in the short form content, getting excited as things get shorter and shorter and shorter. Even this video, I could talk for twice as long about this topic, but I know that a runtime over 30 minutes is more likely to discourage someone than a runtime under 30 minutes, because that is what has become of our minds. That quicker, faster, more is always better, but we're wrong. And it's important that we discuss that and think about that. So that was a rant about attention spans and AI. It won't be my last rant, but it is the first of the moment. It leads off, again, I kind of hinted at it. There's a lot of copyright issues that I have with AI, generative AI. Again, I'm a writer, I'm a reader. I have a lot of artist friends. That is another projects issue. I'm going to call them episodes. We're going to do sort of like a mini series of me going through all of my issues with AI and all of the reasons I think AI is dangerous. Next one will probably be copyright, again, just because the character AI thing is currently so impactful. But it could also be on, again, like I said, TV shows, shortening attention spans. I could write a thesis on my issues with the transition from 22 to 8 episode seasons and the many problems that brings. But that also connects to AI, so we'll talk about that later. If you are interested in that, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stick around and see when I eventually post that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, please give it a comment. I love to see interactions, mostly because, again, they help that AI algorithm that YouTube uses and bumps the video up and allows me to keep talking to all of you about my issues with AI, which, don't we all want to hear my issues with AI? We all want to hear issues with AI. So I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and don't forget to stay tuned for many, many more episodes about my issues with AI.